Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 992 just came out, and this was a great chapter. This was the best action chapter in Wano since Luffy vs. Kaido, which was back in 923. So it's been a long time coming, but this was, I've been talking about how Onigashima, the action has obviously been ramping up. We've been getting more and more battle sequences, especially after a very dry Act 2 in terms of getting fights. I think Zoro versus Kamazo/Killer was the one, I guess, big fight that we got in Act 2. But Act 3, now that we're in Onigashima, we've been getting more and more bits and pieces of fights, but this was the first, I'd say, full chapter almost that was dedicated to one fight, and it was a great fight. I think this was the best way to do the 9 Scabbards versus Kaido. I think Oda really did them justice in this chapter. Before we get into that, let me really briefly skim over the beginning parts of this chapter. I'm just going to touch on them very quick. We have Big Mom, Marco, and Perospero. I'm a little confused by this scene. I'm confused in the sense that I don't know where exactly this is going or why Oda chose to set this up. Because obviously we know that, Oda kind of has to move some pieces around to get to certain scenes, so he had to take Big Mom from inside Onigashima to outside Onigashima. Obviously rolled her over there. He had to get Marco to go out of Onigashima and float around the perimeter. See Perospero, who was the only one of the Big Mom pirates coming out, and they had to talk, meet up, and they had to come back to Onigashima, and that's how he got all 3 of them together in one spot, which is just a very sort of roundabout way to get to this little meeting scene. I'm very interested to see why Oda had it so that he had to have Marco go out and then come back, had Perospero out of all the Big Mom pirates come by himself, and then have Big Mom rolled out, basically, because to me, if it was just to establish that, okay, Big Mom still has something up her sleeve, like to assuage Perospero's concerns, basically, then I'm surprised that he went such a roundabout way of making it happen right here. Like, he couldn't just have Big Mom explain this to Perospero at some point down the line. I don't know. It's interesting to see, and why specifically does Marco have to be here? Are we going to get a little bit of Big Mom versus Marco? That would be an interesting little matchup, but I don't like Marco's odds in the long run. Maybe it is just to hold Big Mom off from the conflict for a little bit, as we know Marco should somewhat be capable of doing, right? Even if it's just him by himself. We've seen a lot from Marco in Marineford. He's got a very defensive Devil Fruit. I assume that maybe he would be capable of keeping Big Mom away from coming back to Onigashima for a little bit, though this is just an interesting way to have done it. Again, a very roundabout way of getting to this sort of trio of characters. Now, that aside, we have inside the interior of Onigashima, everyone's still moving. We've got Shinobu carrying Momonosuke away, Yamato chasing, Luffy's still on his way up. We don't really see the rest of the Straw Hats. The big thing that I kind of liked was, or I guess the small thing that I kind of liked was the little song that Black Maria started playing. The reason I liked this was just the juxtaposition between the start of the song and then cutting to this ferocious battle between the Scabbards and Kaido, where the Scabbards are basically, this is the battle of their lives. This is, their final stand, their last stand, and most of them, or at least some of them we can imagine, are going to die, potentially all of them. So it was just, I always like when you juxtapose sort of a song with a big battle scene. It's reminiscent, I'd say, a little bit of, what's a movie, for example, Lord of the Rings. If you remember from the 3rd Lord of the Rings movie, we had a scene like that. I don't know if Oda really planned to, like, what I would have liked to have seen kind of once that song started would have been for her and her music to have continued playing throughout the rest of the chapter, a little musical style like we saw a little bit in Whole Cake Island, especially in chapter 900, chapter 900, that big musical song, number that Big Mom did at the end of Whole Cake Island. I thought that would have been really cool to have had Black Maria's lyrics going while the Scabbards fought Kaido, but I guess that would have gotten in the way of their dialogue and such. So the way it happened was nice. I like that the song segued into that. I wonder if we are going to get more of Black Maria singing throughout this battle. It'll be very interesting to see. But all of that aside, let's just talk about the Scabbards versus Kaido, because the rest of that doesn't matter as much. This was the main event that everything has been building up to in terms of their storyline. To start with, the spread of all of the Scabbards lined up was amazing. One of the best spreads, I'd say, in Wano so far. In Act 3, I think the only thing that I think tops it, I personally thought that this spread was cooler even than the Straw Hats lined up together, just because I would say that for me personally, I feel like this, I've been saying it for the longest time, right? I don't feel like this is the final battle for the Straw Hats, right? So for me, seeing the Straw Hats all lined up, I don't think Onigashima or the story of Wano is ending here. So for me, seeing all the Straw Hats lined up, it doesn't mean as much because I didn't feel like they were even the centerpiece or the main focus of Wano Act 2 or anything like that, or the build-up storyline up to this point. So I think that they will get their moment later down the line. So it was cool in terms of the novelty, oh, we haven't seen this in a bit. But in terms of the Scabbards lined up, for me, I thought that this was just a more dramatic spread because this is, again, as I've been saying, this is their last stand. Like, this is all of Oden's retainers lined up basically to die and charging into pretty much certain doom, right? So I really enjoyed this spread. I'd say the only thing that compares to it in Act 3 so far for me was, I think, when we initially entered into Onigashima. The entrance into Onigashima and seeing that was one of the best landscape shots I've seen in One Piece in general. Onigashima has an amazing design. It's easy to forget that, but we're having this battle. Maybe it's because we're in the interior of Onigashima, but just that scene that we got that was a cutaway to Big Mom, Marco, and Perospero reminded me of how cool Onigashima is as an island. But anyway, that aside, so the spread was really, really good, right? I think that the way that the battle went for the rest of this chapter was about as well as I would have liked it to go. Let me explain that basically. I would not personally have liked a long extended sort of back and forth between Kaido and the Scabbards, but I like the way that Oda did it, where everybody gets their hits in, right? Everybody's getting their little moments, so starting with Nekomamushi getting his attack in, and obviously Nekomamushi's in Sulong form, so he's really amped up, so him or Inuarashi are probably the best equipped to land that sort of first big blow on Kaido, as we saw, because they should be the strongest Scabbards at the moment by a wide margin, to be honest. So Nekomamushi starting off. Then we got a really cool movement from Kawamatsu. We have not seen an attack like this from Kawamatsu before. This was much more impressive than him just like flipping prisoners around like we've seen in the past. I really like that. I think Kiku and Izu had the most generic moment, just projectile attacks basically hitting Kaido. That's fine. And Raizo was the most pleasant surprise for me because Raizo has seemed like the least combat-centric or combat-capable Scabbard by a wide margin, right? We have seen almost nothing to indicate that Raizo is a strong fighter. He's been talking about ninjutsu and stuff like that, but it's been more so played for gags for the most part. So I was always wondering what would Raizo really bring to the table in terms of a fight like this against Kaido. But we got to see that there is something to ninja abilities and such. And it's not like, this isn't the same as, for example, Kinemon cutting Kaido's fire. This is more so like, a more so tricksy way of dealing with it, where it looks like you can, like, with this ninja scroll, you know, playing into Naruto type stuff. It reminded me a little bit, if you've known Naruto whatsoever, what the fourth Hokage does in Naruto and how he deals with large-scale attacks. It reminded me a lot of how he deals with the Nine-Tailed Fox's attacks and such. And then later on, well, no spoilers, like, Naruto's an old series, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Something similar happens again later towards the end of the series. But point being, I liked that sort of, I don't know if it was a call-out or anything like that, or like a reference or anything like that, using ninjutsu to deal with like a large-scale energy attack like Kaido's Boro Breath, how do you pronounce it? So, but I just thought it was cool, because it was a way of showing Raizo as very useful. That was probably the most effective attack on Kaido, to be honest, because it was Kaido's own attack being turned back on him. But it was just cool to see Raizo having a trick up his sleeve that deals with a very powerful attack without necessarily, like, making the attack seem weak, if that makes sense. So, I enjoyed that. And then the last panel, of course, well, let's talk about one thing first, which is that why are these Scabbards able to damage Kaido? I think we've cleared the air on that, so we now know that it's not... There was some discussion, is it the PTSD aspect of it from seeing Oden's retainers, or is it that they are just skilled in Ryo, which is the ability you need to be able to damage Kaido? I think this chapter we got it pretty much confirmed, I think without a doubt, that it is that the Scabbards took the time to learn Ryo, even if they didn't want to let Oden in on it. And I did like this little flashback that they had of remembering Oden, or this little flashback of, in general, talking with Oden and basically showing us what they were trying to do for Oden behind the scenes, and ending with them all mimicking his styles. Not all of them, obviously. We had Kinemon, Inuarashi, Denjiro, and Ashura Doji. And I'm going to talk about why that 4 makes sense for this final blow in a second. But I did like that sort of quick little flashback we got towards Oden. And I mentioned that I would have liked to have gotten more flashbacks of their time with Oden in general. And this is the one thing I'll say with I'd mentioned this before when the Oden flashback was going on and everything, but the biggest disappointment for me personally, I really love the Oden flashback for the way that it ended and Oden's side of things, but the disappointment for me had been, I had hoped to have seen more of the Scabbard side of things in the Oden flashback, because and people, whenever I bring that up, people are like, oh, you want to go at a 30 chapter Oden flashback? I wouldn't have minded it. I actually thought it would be something like that. But no, I don't need a 30 chapter Oden flashback. I think literally adding 1 or 2 more chapters, just one or 2 more chapters to the Oden flashback, and having shown more of the retainers and what Oden did to earn their trust rather than doing it very quickly in like one panel at a time, like, okay, now this guy loves me, now this guy loves me, etc. I think just a little extra time, 1 or 2 more chapters spent on the Scabbards and Oden's relationship would have exponentially increased the dramatic weight of this chapter. Not to say that this chapter wasn't satisfying, and I really enjoyed it for what it was, and I've been enjoying focusing on this. I think the Scabbards versus Kaido has been the most exciting part of this climax of Onigashima so far. And I told you all back when they first attacked Kaido that I wasn't expecting to really enjoy the moment when the Scabbards all attacked Kaido, but I actually really did in the moment of it because I think Oda did it very well. But the fact is that I think that if 1 or 2 more chapters, like, it's one of those things where like a little more back then would have done so much more for right now. Like a little more time put into there would have exponentially increased the dramatic value of what's happening right now. So that's my one, I guess, regret of Oden's flashback from earlier in Act 3. But that aside, this is still a really great chapter and still a really great fight, and I am really enjoying everything that the Scabbards are doing right now. That aside, let's talk about the action side of things. So we learned that Kaido can use lightning, which is very interesting because, you know, it makes sense considering that Eastern dragons, which Kaido is based off of, have that weather-related ability. But what's interesting is that it means that, one, both Kaido and Big Mom have access to lightning, and we already have Enel who has access to lightning. And it's very possible that Dragon has lightning or weather-related abilities. So just the notion that this sort of weather manipulation or things related to lightning, the sky, thunder, etc., that's actually, when Enel first came out, right, we thought that this was a really broke ability, but the more we've seen, it looks like there's more devil fruits that are just so versatile that they're able to incorporate lightning in different ways. So it's just interesting to me that, like, we already have 2 very powerful emperors who are able to manipulate the weather, and that's just a side part of their abilities, right? Like, it's not as though Kaido's main thing is manipulating the weather, right? The dragon form and his general physical abilities offer him so much more in his fighting arsenal. But it's just interesting that, oh yeah, it's just a thing that he can do, that he can use lightning. It's just a thing that Big Mom can do, that she can use lightning. We still, again, have not yet to see what Dragon can do exactly, but it seems as though it's either weather or at the very least wind related, which could allow him to also manipulate the weather regardless. So either he has a weather devil fruit or a wind devil fruit in my book personally. But Kaido, we just learned a little more about him. I wonder what else we don't know. I might do a little look into Eastern Dragon abilities and see what else they're considered to be capable of, because if Kaido's got, you know, fire breathing and weather manipulation, then it's totally possible that he has other dragon related abilities that we're not thinking of at the moment. In terms of the 9 Scabbards, I had released a video a little while back talking about how strong the 9 Scabbards are, and in general I had said that there are 4 Scabbards, so Ashura Doji, Inuarashi Nekomamushi, and Denjiro, who are clearly portrayed as much stronger than the rest of the Scabbards. We have stuff like them taking on Jack, taking on Calamity, Denjiro casually holding off an enraged Zoro, stuff like that. So there's a clear gap between someone like those guys versus like Kinemon and Kawamatsu, who Oda shows like Zoro can casually brush them off even when they're attacking him. So there's just a gap there in terms of how we're supposed to think of them as fighters, right? So I do think it makes sense that at the end, the 3 Scabbards, so we had Nekomamushi starting things off with the first big attack on Kaido, and then among the 4 Scabbards that were needed to scar Kaido at the end, we had Ashura Doji, Inuarashi, and Denjiro. Kinemon was there because Kinemon is the leader. It's more symbolic. It makes sense that Kinemon is supposed to be there. But we've been shown throughout the story that Kinemon is not exactly a particularly strong fighter. And just a quick recap of Kinemon's fighting history throughout the story in case people overrate him based on reactionary takes from the last couple chapters, because I think people will miss the fact that Kinemon is simply being portrayed as the symbolic leader of the Scabbards, never as the strongest or even one of the strongest Scabbards, because Kinemon lost to Law in Punk Hazard, was portrayed as about equal to Brook, maybe a little stronger throughout Punk Hazard, was clearly portrayed as inferior to Zoro throughout Punk Hazard, was beaten by Doflamingo in Dressrosa, and it was shown that he couldn't even beat Pika in Dressrosa, so there's no reason to compare him to guys like Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, Ashura, who are shown to be able to fight toe-to-toe with a calamity like Jack. There's just a gap between Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, Ashura, and Denjiro, and then the rest. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Kinemon was like at the top of the rest. We have learned that all of the Scabbards can learn Ryo, but again, just as a reminder, knowing an advanced Haki technique does not speak that much to a character's strength overall. Like, there is probably some correlation, like a character that has future sight like Katakuri is probably going to be pretty strong, but it's not necessarily the same thing as proving that that character is strong. They just happen to know a technique that is a little more advanced than what other people know. So, that being said, I think this chapter did kind of confirm a lot of how I had personally ranked the Scabbards before. I do think that Ashura Doji, Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, and Denjiro are clearly the top tiers of those Scabbards. And then other characters like Kawamatsu, Kiku, Izzo, and Kinemon I'd probably put at the head of this secondary pack. They're all very strong, but it's not to the same degree. And then Raizo's practically not a combatant, but he has some good tricks. So that's interesting to see. I do think that this is the best we're going to get out of the Scabbards, because next chapter is pretty much, I think, game over for them. So from here we can talk about basically the future. I had mentioned, I think in the 990 review, I'm not 100% sure, but I had mentioned that basically, you guys can go back and check, that I was kind of viewing this, again, I view this entire Onigashima battle as doomed to end in failure. So I'd been kind of viewing this as maybe a similar 10-chapter run to what we got towards the end of Marineford. So between chapters 570 and 580 of Marineford, I'm kind of trying to draw a parallel between that and here, what we're getting between chapters 990 and chapter 1000. So I think we're going to get a very similar run. And where we were at in Marineford at around this time was basically the big thing in Marineford that changed everything was chapter 573, when Ace got hit by a Kaido at the very end. So literally everything from 570 to the end of 573 looked very positive for the protagonist's side. And then at the end of 573, we got this big twist where Akainu actually kills Ace. Or Ace died the next chapter, but Akainu basically got him at the end of that chapter. So that was the dramatic tone shift. So I'm hoping that basically we've had a sort of rising success for the protagonist side, especially for the Scabbards so far. The Straw Hats are rolling downstairs. You know, they're just having an easy time pretty much. Hyogoro is saying that, like, I don't feel like we can lose. The Scabbards are having a lot of success against Kaido. I mean, this was the biggest, ending the chapter by, like, slashing Kaido and severely damaging him again, basically. Like, ever since Odin did it, they're doing it again. I think that's the most success they're going to have. They're not going to, like, decapitate Kaido or anything like that. So I think this was the greatest moment of triumph that the Scabbards are going to have. And then beyond this, I think at the end of the next chapter, 993, I think that's when we're set for the tables to turn. Even something like seeing like Big Mom is kind of, you know, she was rolled away obviously in kind of a humiliating way earlier, but she is back. She's putting on her mean, dangerous face again. She did do that earlier and got rolled away, but let's assume that it's going to be a little more serious this time, right? So I do think that things are set for the tables to turn. I hope I'm right with my prediction that the end of 993 is going to be the moment that everything switches around, because I just feel like it's going to be way too easy for them if they get their win the way that things are going so far. So, all that being said, I think that this was a great chapter. I think we are still set up for failure in the near future, and I'm predicting that next chapter, the very end of it, hopefully, is going to be when the tables turn. So if you enjoyed, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all later.